I want to congratulate and thank the members of the Commission who sat for 10 meetings. There are different viewpoints on the outcome of the report. I certainly have my views, which I think are well documented. I made a submission to the Commission. It's disappointing there's no change in Cork, but you know, Cairlock, c'est la vie. I think there's a missed opportunity, and I'll come back to that myself when the report is debated, if it comes before the House. That's if we're still here, of course. I mean, it may not be part of the next generation at all. Senator Bernard O'Connor, you may have to go into part of Wicklow still, you never know, you know. But anyway, that's for another day's work. But just to thank the members of the Commission, Cairlock, for their work. And I think the one point that Senator Layden did make, which is that they've disenfranchised people, that still continues. In our own city of Cork, Bishopstown is divided in two, and it's disappointing that it's still disenfranchised. And what Senator Layden is right to highlight is you have communities now who have different voices, but there's no unity of voice, and that's disappointing. I think he's right in that. Senator Noon raised the issue of the Royal Irish Society public health debate, and I think she's raised a very interesting point, Cairlock, because if you look at and talk to young people, social media is becoming an integral part of their life, and it is putting pressure on them, whether it's Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter or Facebook or whatever else the new fad is. But she is right, and I would be happy to have that debate in terms of social media. Senator Norris and Senator Burke raised the issue of the private members' bill this afternoon. I think it's important that this bill does not be allowed to just vanish either. And I think I would implore all members of the House to speak on the bill. And I think it's an important bill. None of us want to see people lose their homes, to be discommoded, to be evicted in any shape or form. And to be fair to both Senator Norris and Senator Burke, they've raised very important and interesting points around how we should work together to ensure that people don't have to face the ignominy of having their houses lost or having to be evicted. And I think it is important that people work together and that the institutions of state and the banks work with people. And I would be very anxious that this bill does not vanish today. And I would hope and implore all members even to come in and speak in support of Senator Norris in this one. Senator McLaughlin, you raised the issue, which I've addressed, about the Irish Language Act, but also about the very important report, the expert panel on concrete blocks. And I've asked the Minister to come to the House. Senator Mulhern has raised it here 2 weeks ago, and that request has gone in. But you are right. It is an issue that has vexed the residents in Donegal and Mayo in particular, and I know that your constituency colleague, Chief Whip Joe McHugh, has already spoken about it with me in terms of the issue of redress, and you were right to raise that here this afternoon or this morning. I think we raised it with Pyrite. We can do the same here, I think, and it's a matter of finding a way around it, and I've asked the Minister to come to the House. Senator Burke raised the issue of the bill that's before us, but also the need to hold people to account in terms of the HSC, and I spoke about it yesterday, and I agree with him on that. Senator Devine made reference to the Minister for Local Government and Environment, Minister Murphy. I gave a comprehensive reply yesterday to that debate, which was raised in the Order of Business by our colleague, Senator Conway Walsh. None of us are complacent and can be about the issue of safety of people, whether it's in high development units like high-rise or multi-unit accommodation. Where I disagree with you on is that other than Priory Hall, we don't seem to have a huge litany of buildings being condemned. And I would hate for, and if I'm wrong, then I'll come back and redress my remarks, but I would hate for people to think that we have allowed for no controls, no standards in our buildings in the past decade. We actually have. What the Minister said this morning on Morning Ireland, or sorry, on one of the radio programmes, was in the context of the height of the buildings, that we don't have the same density that was in London, but where we must ensure and where we have as one voice to be heard on is there can be no dilution of standards and there can be no shortcuts. We learned from the Valentine Day fire in Dublin 1981, we must learn from the fire that took place in London, and I agree with you. The report back on the 19th of July must be acted upon, and I don't buy the line that there's not resources available to carry out inspections. They're happening as we speak the whole time. What we must ensure is that the reports that come back from each local authority, and equally from the Residential Tenancy Board, is acted upon if there are deficiencies there, because you are right. We cannot err on the side of finance here. It must be about the lives and safety of all people affected, and I accept that point. Senator O'Sullivan raised the issue of the examinations and the correctors and the examination commission. It wasn't post leaving cert or junior cert that this was highlighted. It actually happened during the recruitment process as well. And like you, Senator, I did a piece of invigilating and correcting myself, and I wish all our colleagues well as they get their sample papers together to hand to their superintendent. And you are right. There needs to be integrity around the marking, and the highest of standards must take place in the correcting of these exams, because the lives of so many students is dependent upon the outcome here. And I share your view on that. And if there needs to be, by the Examination Commission with the Department of Education, a review of the remuneration, but also of the type of corrector and how it's done, then let's look at that. And I share your view on that. And finally, I replied to Senator Moran O'Connor, so I can't give Senator my good friend Senator Mara Louise O'Donnell a definitive answer, but I'm happy to work with all members of the House to ensure that there won't be, a quick passage, that there won't be alacrity around the bill. That hasn't been my form here. We only had one guillotine. That was for a particular reason, as you know quite well, in terms of a certain bill. But I'm quite happy to allow for us to have that debate, provided we don't have grandstanding and filibustering either on each side.
The order of business agreed? Agreed. So, can I ask the acting to suspend till 12:45?
I so propose, Carol.
Is that agreed? House stands suspended till 12:45.
National Housing Cooperative Bill, second stage, private members' business. The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call on Senator Norris, whose bill this is, to speak. And you have 12 minutes, Senator.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to move the National Housing Cooperative Bill 2017. I welcome the Minister of the House. I think this is an extremely important bill, and I'm very relieved that it has been allowed in the Senate, because there were questions about whether or not this bill would create a charge on the Exchequer. I asked the Master of the High Court, Mr. Ed Honohan, who is largely responsible for preparing the bill, if this was the case, and he said definitively no. The other aspect that might have created problems is the question of property rights. Now, I have to say I have never understood why, in the light of the fact that the public good in the Irish Constitution trumps every other right, I've never understood why governments have not had the guts to appeal to the public good in passing legislation. I'd like to pay particular tribute to two people, Ed Honohan, who produced the bill, and Deputy John McGuinness, who's in the process of introducing it in Dáil Éireann. They've both done a very great deal of work. Now, yesterday, we held a press conference in Boswell's Hotel. The only people to appear there were the Irish Times and RTE Radio. I saw absolutely nothing whatever reported about this, and it is quite extraordinary. The people there were Mike Allen from Focus Ireland, Peter McVerry from the McVerry Trust, Austin Byrne from Right to Homes, David Hall from Irish Mortgage Organisation, Jerry Beads, Brian Riley, and Caroline Lennon-Nally. Again, I look at the press gallery and I see nobody there. That is extremely disappointing. And if there are any reporters listening or watching this on their units in their offices, I'd like to appeal to them to take note of this debate and to really report it in some detail. Now, I would say to the Minister, I'm not claiming, Right to Homes and the other people involved are not claiming that this bill is perfect. It is the start of a debate. Yes, we would like the government to take note of it. We'd like the government and my other colleagues here today to put down amendments to make it a good bill. We're not going to try and rush it through. We're giving the debate 1 hour and 45 minutes so that it would be left in suspended animation on the order paper and so that it can be continued, because we believe in cooperation. This is an absolute disaster facing this country. I think if the public realised what was coming down the line, they would be in a panic. You know, the authorities, the system, cannot deal with 7,000 people homeless. They're incapable of dealing with it. What happens when that becomes 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people, as will surely happen when Allied Irish banks, under the instructions of the ECB, unload the distressed mortgages? I'd like to put in the figures. I can't put in any definite figures because there's quite a range of figures available to people. Right to Homes say that the number of accounts is 60,000. The number of people directly affected is about 250,000, and the total debt outstanding is 14 billion. Well, now, I don't know. I can't confirm that, because there is a dearth of demographic and statistical information. So that's one of the first things we need. We need to scope the complete dimension of the problem. But we do have some figures that are absolutely clear from the central bank. On the 31st of March this year, there was a total of 8.8 billion in outstanding balances on mortgages and arrears for more than a year on private homes, covering 41,000 accounts in total, and that's data from the central bank. The total in arrears on private homes came to 2.6 billion. In March of this year, private home accounts in arrears for more than a year made up 5.6% of all residential mortgage accounts. So we have what is very clearly a really serious problem facing this country. I wonder if people in Ireland have forgotten that eviction is a dirty word in this country. Charles Stewart Parnell, Michael Davitt, throughout the 19th century, fought against eviction. And I find it astonishing that an Irish republic should stand over eviction. Not only that, but they should invite the vulture funds into this country to buy up the slack and make a profit out of it, because there is no other motive in vulture funds other than vulgar profiteering. And what's happened really here is, just as at the time of the famine, a rigid economic theory is being implemented in this country as if we were some kind of a laboratory experiment. But we're dealing with real people. We're dealing with human misery. We're dealing with people over years being tortured over financial worry. And when I look at the ECB, the European Central Bank, I have to say it makes me grimace. These were the people who illegally forced this country into redeeming the bondholders, taking on board the gambling debts of the Irish banks. And then they turned around and did precisely the opposite in Cyprus. So there was no principle involved. And we paid out 65 billion. The bondholders were laughing all the way to the banks. Some of them bought up the bonds at 5% of their face value, and the Irish taxpayer was forced to redeem them at 100% of face value. And when the vulture funds move into this country, take over the distressed mortgages, and evict people, guess what the cherry on the pie is? The Irish taxpayer will be presented with the bill for the evictions. And they can be very costly, including helicopters, police, the sheriff's office, dogs, the whole works. I mean, it's like forcing the Jews to pay for their own execution during the Second World War. It's an absolute disgrace. And to think that the government gave them charitable status. What in the name of Christ is charitable about the vulture funds? Charitable status, so they don't have to pay tax. They got away with 77 million of profits, and they didn't pay a single red cent to the Irish taxpayer on their deeds. So I find this quite an extraordinary situation for any government. And I have to say, I'm very glad that all the minor parties, the Greens, the People Before Profit, all the small parties, have supported this bill. I've spoken to my friends and my colleagues, and Senator Burke spoke this morning on the order of business and said this was a very important bill. There were things wrong with it, which I accept, but that it should be discussed and it should be debated in this House and left on the order paper. So all the smaller parties, and I've spoken to my friends, as I said, in the major parties, and they've all agreed in principle with this bill. How could they do anything else? That wonderful man, the Jesuit Father Peter McVerry, said he did not know how anybody in Ireland could not support this bill. It's inarguable. There's no case against it. The bill is not perfect. It's intended to start a discussion on the issue. What has happened here, and it's right across the continent of Europe, and it's in the United States of America, and it's the reason Donald Trump got elected, it's the reason for Brexit. At the time of the financial crisis, when I called at that time, and it was just beginning, I asked the government to institute a minister for home protection. Not homeland protection, not a neurotic reaction to a perceived terrorist threat, but a reaction to the threat of people being evicted from their homes, a minister for home protection to ensure that Irish citizens would have a roof over their head. And I think Ireland is unusual in Europe in the very large amount of home ownership. There's a thing in Ireland about the land. There's a thing in Ireland about having your own home, not renting, but owning your home and having that to go home to. With regard to the banks, I mean, look at them. They have learned nothing. They are precisely the same as they were before the financial crisis. The banks have taken it upon themselves to close down various, and I won't specify all of them, but the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign is one, a good, decent, peaceful campaigning organisation. They've decided to unilaterally close it down. They've also closed down the accounts of some embassies in Ireland. That's a bit bloody high-handed, you might think, and particularly when the government has such a large stake in these banks. And then they went off and they started charging outrageous interest rates, illegal interest rates, which forced some people into losing their homes and which forced some people into losing their lives. And I remember at the beginning of this crisis somebody saying fatuously, "Ah, well, nobody lost their lives." Oh, really? I think quite a few people put under this enormous financial terror have actually taken the ultimate step to take their own lives. So what this bill does is it creates a new agency, a national housing property, national housing cooperative bill. It creates a national housing cooperative which will operate to move in when groups like the Allied Irish Bank unload this enormous amount of shares, creating a possible avalanche of homelessness. The housing cooperative will move in and take over the distressed mortgages at the current level of value. And they will then rent them back or remortgage them to the original owners so that they can stay in their houses. And that, I think, is a really good response. I have to say, I don't understand how the bloody vulture funds got into this country in the first case and how they were given this privileged status. And I like Michael Noonan. I think he's been an admirable and honourable politician. But how anybody could say that vultures were a good idea because they cleaned up corpses, I cannot understand how any minister in the Irish government could make such a gaffe. Because what we're talking here is not bird corpses, snake corpses, animal corpses. What we're talking about is the corpse of the well-being of Irish citizens. And so I'm happy to move this bill, particularly in a period when somebody like Mike Allen, Director of Advocacy at Focus Ireland, says, "No strategy to tackle our housing and homelessness crisis can succeed unless it is able to stem the dreadful flow of families losing their homes on a daily basis." Over 70 families a month in Dublin this year. Just think about it. 70 ordinary families losing their homes. Now, this can be financed. I'll just finish on this because I understand I have a few minutes to the end. I'll finish on this. The capital required would be secured by a 20-year secured property bond, secured against the properties. And we believe that we would have the backing of major international financial institutions to do so, because long-term 20-year loans are at a uniquely low level. And the financial institutions are looking for something good, for something guaranteed to take up. And I think it's for that reason, Caoimhín, and I'll sit down on this point, that this bill creates no charge on the Exchequer. We should be ashamed of ourselves as an Oireachtas if we do not take on this issue. And I'd like to quote Edmund Honohan, Master of the High Court, when he said to us in both houses of the Oireachtas, "Gentlemen," he should have said gentlewomen as well, but we'll forgive him. After all, he is the Master of the High Court, not the Mistress of the High Court. "Gentlemen, you are the gatekeepers of legislation. Do not pass the buck." Thank you, Last Caoimhín.
I would like to welcome Deputy John McGuinness and his colleagues to the gallery. Now, Senator Victor Boyhan.
Look, I formally second the bill, and I firstly want to welcome the Minister here back to the Seanad, and I also want to acknowledge Deputy John McGuinness from Kilkenny here, and acknowledge the enormous amount of work that he has done in the upper house and outside of Parliament, and has been a constant advocate in relation to this matter.
Upper house, I would think.
In the
other house.
The other house, we'll say.
Yeah.
So I think it's important, and I want to acknowledge the enormous work that Senator Norris has put forward to the bill, my friend and colleague, and I'm delighted to be seconded, and I'm delighted to have been asked. And I suppose let's put a bit of context in here. What are we talking about? The purpose of this bill is to provide for the establishment of an industrial and provident society to be called the National Housing Cooperative Society, with the mandate and powers to acquire, manage, rent, or sell distressed mortgages, so that the occupants of houses can move from the status of distressed mortgagor by means of a mortgage to possibly a rent and mortgage. And I think that's important that we get that context right. Senator Norris made the point about getting facts and details in relation to it. I got an email this morning from a contact who contacted the Central Bank, and these are the latest figures, and I want to share them with the House. There were 278 homes were repossessed in the first quarter of this year. 278 were repossessed in the first quarter of this year. And we know also in these figures that 1,645 legal proceedings have been issued for the repossessions of family homes in the first quarter of this year. That's 1,645. And I think it is important to quantify some figures around this debate to get some sense of the urgency and the importance of it. I was struck by two simple words that Senator Norris said here this morning, and that was financial terror. And I think that gets the message home clear. We all know our friends, our members of our family, colleagues in our workplace that have lived in terror every day to try and honourably meet their financial commitments, to hold their roof over their head and to secure a roof over their head for their loved ones and their family. And that is a noble cause, and one that should be supported by everybody in the houses of the Oireachtas. Everyone has a right to a home, and the consequences of doing nothing is that thousands of people will end up on our social housing list when we already have a national housing crisis. So it is imperative on the government to step in through a mechanism like this bill and try and give some support for people who genuinely wish to get support. I think it's also very important that this should not be seen by anybody outside this House as some form of charter for those who can pay and will not pay. Because that's a really, really important message we need to get out there. There are people who can pay and do not want to pay and discharge their honourable debt to honourable financial institutions. And I think that's a really important line. We are trying to deal with vulnerable people who are in their own family home. And this legislation and this bill that's set out by Senator Norris clearly sets out that. So I think that's really important. And since the financial crash in 2007, the level of home mortgage arrears has reached alarming levels with serious social and economic consequences. An urgent intervention is required to stem these expensive and exceptional circumstances, and also the expensive litigation in taking actions through the courts to effectively evict people from their homes. If people are driven from their homes for inability to pay a mortgage, the implications, as I said, are devastating for this country, and they are devastating socially as well as economically. The National Housing Co-op Bill 2017 seeks to resolve the difficulties facing homeowners with mortgage arrears and to broker and find resolution and a solution to prevent people from being ultimately turfed out of their homes by the banks and vulture funds. It is envisaged that the National Housing Cooperative, when established, would purchase the properties and related debt from the various lending bodies, subject, of course, to a whole load of nuance and change. And this is where the legislation may be somewhat weak, but as Senator Norris has said, this is kick-starting an issue. This is getting a debate going. It's open for amendments, and he's indicated he's open for amendments to make this a better piece of legislation. That's what's incumbent on parliamentarians, to bring proposals forward, to draw on the expertise and the knowledge, cross-party and none, of people to make this better legislation. That's our job, nothing less. We should settle for nothing less. Significant benefits would flow from this bill. most other people would remain in their homes. They'd have greater security of tenure. Repossessions would be limited in certain, very few circumstances would there be an exception. And I reiterate, those who can pay and won't pay should get no comfort from this legislation. I think that is really, really important. I want to wrap up by sharing some more facts, because we need to deal with facts and figures if we really to get to the bottom of this issue and put in place meaningful and proper measures, which this bill attempts to do. And I quote from figures released by the Central Bank, the Central Bank of Ireland in June 2017, and they indicate that the number of mortgage accounts for principal dwelling houses in arrears fell further in the first quarter of 2017. That has to be welcomed. This marks the 15th consecutive quarter of decline. A total of 76,422 accounts were in arrears at the end of March. That is still a very significant number. Over 76,000 in arrears at the end of March. A decline, okay, of 1.4%. So it is a decline. But we know why that's happening, but it's still very, very significant. The number of mortgage accounts that were classified as restructured by the end of March were 120,894. Now that's telling you, that's a restructured. We know our friends and our colleagues, let's make it personal. We know our neighbours and our friends and our colleagues who are only paying interest loan mortgages. It's unsustainable. It can't go on. There is a crisis, and it's something that we need to get. And finally, in relation to these figures, the Central Bank talk about the number of buy-to-lets, BTLs, mortgage accounts in arrears as of March, 24,500. That is a phenomenal figure. Minister, financial terror has reigned over so many people. So many people's lives have been destroyed. So many people were unable to continue to live because of this terrible, terrible crisis in terms of mortgages and homes. So many people bought their first and family home with great expectation, with great pride, for that was to be their family homestead. And it hasn't been possible. It has all fallen away for so many people. We owe it to do something here. I want to wrap up by thanking Senator Norris for a bill, for setting it out there, for inviting people to add to it, detract from it, and make it a better piece of legislation. For far too long, politicians, and I'm going to address politicians because they're members of this House and both Houses, have bellyached on the radio, on the media, about the distressed nature of mortgages and the financial ruin that people have suffered as a result. It is time now to speak up, to be accountable, to put into action their words, and come to this House and support this legislation.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Jennifer Main O'Connor, you have 8 minutes.
Cathaoirleach and Minister, thank you. And just on behalf of Fianna Fáil, we do in principle support the bill here today, but we feel it's incomplete, and I'll just speak on it there now. Fianna Fáil's position on mortgage arrears is that every effort should be made to keep families in their home. It has been 10 years since the onset of financial crisis, but no sustainable long-term solution has come from the Fine Gael-led governments to actually tackle and assist families in genuine mortgage arrears. And that's actually factual, Minister. Fianna Fáil published a mortgage resolution office bill in 2013, which would have allowed an independent office to assist families. The previous Fine Gael government rejected it, as their preference was to allow the banks to remain veto. This discouraged families from engaging to resolve their mortgages, as they believed the banks did not have their best interest at heart. Even though there has been a very slight decrease in those in mortgage arrears, for more than 2 years there are still 33,000 homes in mortgage distress, and over 2 years there has been a worrying increase in the number of mortgages that are over 90 days. This remains a major challenge. Fianna Fáil is bringing forward today a mortgage arrears resolution. It's called the Family Home Bill 2017. Actually, Deputy Michael McGrath is actually bringing the first stage of this Fianna Fáil bill into Dáil Éireann today. And I know that there has been a group working with this bill for the last few months. So again, that is actually going to the Dáil today, the first stage of the Family Home Bill. This campaign, led by Fianna Fáil to remove the veto power from the banks and other lenders, has been going on for a number of years, but Fine Gael has refused to budge. It is still said by MABs and personal insolvency practitioners that the biggest hurdle with dealing with mortgages and lenders, there's a massive issue with mortgage lenders, Minister. This new bill would use the current insolvency mechanism, but it would remove the bank's veto. It would force the lender to come up with a sustainable long-term solution. If the lenders do not come up with a solution, then the Mortgage Resolution Office, which is under the Personal Insolvency Service, will create a mortgage resolution order. This would involve the office coming up with a sustainable long-term solution and allow families to stay in their homes. Fianna Fáil supports the principle of keeping people in the family home, and while it supports this intentions of the National Housing Co-operative Bill 2017, there are some very serious questions and concerns that need to be addressed. While well-intentioned, the bill completely lacks clarity and at a minimum requires availability of $5 billion and the recruitment of at least 300 people. In debating this bill, we have been absolutely honest and be absolutely clear about what is possible in the context of this particular bill. As it stands, this bill will be stopped before it enters Dáil Éireann, as it will not receive a money message. Opposition parties or groupings are prevented under the Constitution Article 17, subsection 2, from passing legislation that has significant cost. By reading the bill, it is clear that it is a money bill and only the government can proceed with a money bill. It is estimated again that the co-op will have to raise at least $5 billion. If these are to be raised through bonds, as in the case with NAMA, this will ultimately have to be guaranteed by the state. In the bill, it is drafted, it is not clear again on the co-op function. It is unclear from the bill whether the homeowner is activating the process or not. It is unclear how much control the homeowner has in this process. And that's a massive issue. There's such lack of clarity in that all this does need to be resolved. With the mortgage to rent scheme, for all its flaws, the homeowner must go itself and do this process. This bill is also unclear about whether the house or the debts is sold. In NAMA's case, the loans were purchased at a discount. The bonds used to fund NAMA are guaranteed by the state. It is unclear if the co-op will become a landlord or a landowner. For example, in the main title it refers to the possibility of the co-op renting distressed mortgages. This again highlights the incompleteness of the bill. In some cases, the bill suggests that a homeowner will have to give up their house but remain in debt. This certainly would not serve the homeowner. It is unclear what the co-op will actually own, the house, the loan or both. It is unclear what the homeowner is giving up. Given this co-op will need state support in terms of guarantees, the lack of clarity over the function of the bill is likely to cost the state and the homeowner. Evidence suggests that repossession is currently not the primary issue. It is typically the steps before that point that is causing stress among homeowners. Fianna Fáil again today is bringing this Mortgage Resolution Family Home Bill 2017. We believe that this offers genuine, practical, constructive solutions to assist families to stay in their homes. It is far less complex and it is also far more practical, a cost base, and will not require a money message. Look, and again, in principle, we do support this bill, and it is about everybody working together and getting information and making sure that people stay in their homes. We have a housing crisis, Minister. We have people losing their homes. But I believe that Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Independents, Sinn Féin, Labour, everybody needs to work to make sure going forward that there is that chance for people to stay in their home. And I just want to congratulate Senator Norris and Deputy McGuinness, because I know they've worked hard on this. And again, it's all groups working together to make sure that people and families do not lose their homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Kieran O'Donnell, you have 8 minutes.
I want to welcome the Minister. I want to, I suppose, may not agree with everything, but the sentiment of what Senator Norris and the intent I applaud. Can I just, this was in before the Oireachtas Finance Committee a short time ago, and I see our Chairman, Deputy McGuinness, in the audience, in the gallery. And I've had time to reflect, and I suppose when I was looking at it, do we have a problem with people with mortgages at the moment? The answer is yes. Why have we a problem? It's a legacy issue. It's an issue where basically many of these people will be in the years probably 05, probably 06, 07, where they bought houses at astronomical amounts, where basically the property market was allowed to run on unchecked. And we're talking about responsibility. I think Fianna Fáil have to take a share of responsibility for that. The issue is, how do we address it at the moment? And the bill that you're putting forward here is about effectively addressing the issue in terms of concerns over the vulture funds, which I would have. I think there needs to be a serious look now as to how the banks dispose of their loans. And certainly, and discussions I would have with people that are involved in the property area, in the rental area, there are concerns, particularly in the Dublin market, that the level of control that some of the vulture funds have over the property market and the rental market is worrying. And it's something we need to look at, and maybe it's something we need to bring in controls. We can't have a situation whereby a large group have some sort of control over rentals, and it's something that's an aside. But this particular, what you're proposing here, and I suppose I want to pose questions. The first question is on the funding. The funding has been referred to in terms that the state will have to underwrite it. It may be regarded as another mini NAMA. The structure of it isn't that different. Secondly, issue in terms of, you're talking about your European Investment Fund, which would have to have its rules changed. Could they be changed? Is that a practical measure?
Proposed it.
Well, I'm just saying, I'm posing the questions.
Yeah, very good question.
The next question really I'd have is does this do anything for supply? The biggest issue in the housing market at the moment is supply. It does nothing for supply. It basically deals with a group that are in distressed loans in the banks. It doesn't address supply. The other issue it doesn't address is it doesn't address sustainable mortgages. The problem here is that people took out mortgages. We know them up and down the country. I have them in Limerick, where people bought three-bedroom semis, in some cases for close to €300,000 in Limerick. It was crazy. They weren't sustainable. And even if they are moved, and the aspiration was to purchase their own home, if it's moved to this National Housing Co-op, they still move with the entire debt. The question is here, is the banks themselves have to come up to resolutions. If the debt is written down to what they regard as the recoverable amount, the banks have already taken the hit of that in their balance sheet. Why should they be selling that on to someone else? Why shouldn't we come up with a mechanism where they can deal with the individual mortgage holders? And there's a lot of double speaking on here. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, it suits the banks to sell loans in large numbers to not have to deal with the issue. I would be posing it a different way. I would be posing it, we have bailed out the banks at considerable cost. And even if you come along and you say 14 billion Facebook loans, that you purchase them from the banks at 5 billion, which is now their write-down value. That's 9 billion. The taxpayer has already bailed out. And when I talk about the taxpayer, I'm talking about the citizen. I'm talking about the person who's on social welfare who is paying VAT on goods they purchase. They're paying excise duty on drinks and cigarettes. I'm talking about the holistic term of the citizen. They've already paid for that. And the question is whether the solution lies within the banks themselves. And I think that what I really want here is that this is brought about at a critical time, a discussion around how we deal with the local term we use, vulture funds, large investments, how we deal with the banks selling on multiple loans, and how we deal with them selling on home loans, residential loans, but also how we deal with them selling on small business loans, and whether the banks themselves now have to step up to the plate and accept their share of responsibility in giving mortgages to people. They were being doled out like confetti. There was people that were coming, I had people that were coming in, I was elected as a councillor in 2004, you were meeting people. They were getting mortgages they shouldn't have got. and everything was set up to give them the mortgage. And people, we have a very, very fundamental instilled in us, and Senator Norris made reference to it. We value the ownership of our home. It should be aspiration of everyone to enable someone to own their home. Even if they go in to the cooperative, it doesn't change the basis for the homeowner. They still have the full loan. They may end up becoming a tenant. They may never own their home. The question there is, we need to find a structure that they can start to own their home. The bank's doing write-offs, right, to such a level that they're sustainable. They've already done the write-off in their balance sheets as it is. And I think that's something. A few other points, really, I suppose, in terms of the structure of the bill, and I made reference to it in the Finance Committee, and I'm trying to be constructive here, because I'm working from the view that we are now at a juncture that we need to look at people in their homes, not only to maintain them in their homes, but can we find a mechanism to enable them to be able to get back to being in control of purchase of their homes over time. If the co-op comes along, it can do it in one or two ways. It can buy the loan or it can buy the property. If they buy either the loan or the property, well, let's say they buy the property, the individual remains on as a tenant. That person is perfectly entitled, if their income is sufficient, to apply for that. The rent supplement scheme is gone, so they would now have to go on. They would have a situation where they didn't own the house, even though it was a house they previously lived in, and suddenly they would probably be entitled to a form of rent supplement or HAP, and the state would effectively be paying for that. The worry is here is the National Housing Cooperative is creating another residential mini NAMA. And I, for one, feel we need to move beyond that. And I, for one, want to put the responsibility back in the banks to sort out the mess they created and ensure that people can remain on their homes. The mortgage to rent scheme, all these schemes need to be looked at again. Are they fit for purpose? The worry I have here is that in terms of funding, there are many questions. It doesn't bring about any increase in supply. It doesn't bring about any situation where we have sustainable mortgages who are living in the...
Kicked out of their houses, those houses are on the market.
No, you're missing. No. That's something we need to address. That's something that the banks need to come up with. If they've written down the loans, the 5 billion, and that means they've written down the loans by virtually what, 9, my maths should be better, about 18%. They've written down, and the final point.
You're into injury time.
Why should the vulture funds be able to, or anyone, even the National Housing Cooperative, being all its merits being good, to be able to pick that up at a reduced rate? Why can't a homeowner get it? That's the question I want to pose. When the write-off is already there.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rose Conway-Welch.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. And first of all, I would like to welcome the Minister here, but to say fair play to the activists and Senator Norris and Senator Boyhan and indeed Deputy John McGuinness and all other people who have made it possible for us to be discussing this bill here. I acknowledge its attempts to stop the tide of citizens and families being turfed out on the streets, and I think it was apt earlier when Senator Norris talked about evictions, because that's what it is. And the question for us as legislators is, and the question for government is this going to be the government that continues to condone evictions? And I, or my party certainly cannot stand over that. Now, it's not a perfect bill, but we don't deal with perfect bills. We get bills and we do our best to make them perfect through stage after stage of scrutiny and debate. And I welcome the fact that Senator Norris and Senator Boyhan have both said that they will welcome amendments and changes to this. But today it's all about the principles and the spirit of the bill, and that is the spirit I am very happy to support. My party has brought legislative proposals before aimed at giving borrowers a chance at least. For example, our Land and Conveyancing Reform Bill in 2013 could have made a huge difference, but sadly that was rejected. And since then, the same old government line has triumphed. The banks must come first, the borrower, the consumer's rights and the rights of fairness is bottom of the list, and the banks must come first. We see this in delays in dealing with tracker mortgages and indeed the battle and what I would count as the crime of tracker mortgages. The rural closures, again the AIB flotation, all of those things in terms of the attitudes of the banks and the banks never being reined in to be held accountable. And we see that in the Finance Committee ourselves in terms of inviting the banks to come in. We see in the last number of weeks even, they have refused to come before us. The excuse of the part flotation of the AIB has been used, and all of the other banks have trotted out the same lines that they won't come in for a number of months. And I certainly don't think that that's acceptable. But this is the mentality that has us here in this situation, and it must change. Michael Noonan, as Minister, rolled out the red carpet to the vulture funds. Indeed, it's just this time last year at the economic dialogue that I put to him exactly had he quantified the amount of money that was lost through the sweetheart deals that he was given to vulture funds, and he never addressed the matter. He saw them as being a solution, and I certainly never agreed with him on this. They are part of the problem. But vultures don't kill, they just prey on the carrion. These funds actively kill off small businesses and attack homeowners. They are the predators, not the vultures. There is a thing in Ireland, as was said earlier on, about land and home ownership that I think that we should cherish. But there is also a thing in Ireland of corruption, cronyism and protection of the golden circle. And when we look at the 67 billion that was given to these banks that we're here to talk about today, that we're trying to protect citizens from, and the fact that we are paying, and we forget this, the fact that we are paying 7 billion and more every year just to service that debt. That is 7 billion that could be used on physiotherapy services, other health services and many other services that people are in desperate need of around this country. But they've got away with it. We are all very clear they have got away with it, and they continue to get away with it. And that's why what we are discussing here today is so important. There are some of us who tell us that we have a low rate of repossession in this country, but that ignores the so-called voluntary surrenders, but more importantly, it ignores the context. The context is that these same banks have wrecked the country, as I said, destroyed the economy and made tens of thousands of people unemployed and have forced people to immigrate. And we talk now as if everything is okay and we have full employment, and yet I come from an area that has 30% plus unemployment. How can we explain that? And again, the banks have got away with it and the huge part that they have played. Now, as these people try to recover, those banks come knocking on the door saying that we owe them. I think we have it backwards. In a normal context, this bill would be unnecessary. There will always be a small number in society, as was alluded to earlier on, through bad luck, who fail to pay their mortgages, and a number of people who can pay but won't pay. And the